Welcome to Americana Archives. Today we have part 5 of the story with the headline, Indian War History, with the subheadline, Reminiscences of Old Strike the Ree, Old Dakota, and their contemporaries in the early part of the present century. This article was written by Creep Easy of Calamity Farm. It says, catching one of the hobbled horses that was feeding on the bark and twigs of the young cottonwood trees, which had been felled for that purpose by the Indians. Young Strike the Ree leaped upon its back with his prizes and plunged headlong down the level stretch of flats, followed by a large body of Arakiri warriors who had imitated his example. Luckily, the young Yankton had selected a sturdy and swift-footed Mustang, and with whip, he hurried it up through a dark canyon out over the plains with an excitement known only to those who have experienced some similar deed of daring and are running for their lives. The night was dark and tempestuous. Thunder rolled across the sky, and the Arakiris soon lost all trace of their hated foe. During the whole night, the young fugitive sped on his way, encountering all difficulties with the stoic indifference characteristic of his race. It is needless to detail the adventures of the route. Suffice it to say that ere morning, he found it impossible to continue on in the direction he had taken, owing to the number of swollen creeks and torrents that were rushing to the Missouri and obstructing his passage. He changed his course in the direction of Eagle's Nest Hills, and after 3 days of hard riding, during which time he allowed little rest to himself or his sturdy steed, he crossed the headwaters of the Wakpa, or Grand River, and pursued his way in the direction of the Cheyenne. The Cheyenne Valley was at that time the scene of one of those annual gatherings of traders, trappers, and Indians. 2 rival fur companies, which for several years had been endeavoring to outwit, outtrap, and outtrade one another, were encamped on the banks of this fur-bearing tributary of the Missouri, engaged in outfitting their men with the supplies which had been transported up the Missouri from St. Louis on a boat and landed a few days before. To this rendezvous, various free trappers, traders, French Creoles, and Indians had come to dispose of their furs and purchase the necessities and luxuries of life, and a competition ensued between the rival companies for their trade, each one trying to get all the peltries and furs they could in exchange for the tempting supplies of sugar, coffee, whiskey, ammunition, tobacco, scarlet cloth blankets, bright shawls, and glittering trinkets. Here then was the trapper's cessation from toil, hunger, and alarm, where they were all for fun and frolic, great feastings and carousals, where they drank together, sang together, laughed, whooped, and tried to outbrag and outlie each other in their stories of adventures, conquests, and achievements. The encampment presented a lively scene. The various mess fires were surrounded by picturesque groups, standing, sitting, and reclining, some busied in cooking, others in cleaning their weapons, while the frequent laugh told that the rough joke or merry story was going on. In the middle of the camp, before the trader's store, sat 2 persons, engaged in conversation in the Indian language. One was Old Dakota, and the other was Strike the Ree. The latter was squatted on a buffalo robe, his strong features glaring in the bright sunlight, while he recounted to the young Frenchman his adventures and exploits since they parted on the banks of the Cannonball. He had come in during the day, and trading his Mustang for a new blanket, a quantity of bright cloth, and trinkets, he departed down the Cheyenne to rejoin Crazy Bull and his friends. In due time, he arrived at his native village, amid the deafening applause of his people. Great were the rejoicings of that memorable day. Dances were begun and carried on until a late hour. A feast was declared, and ever after he was held in high honor. During the following summer, several engagements took place between the Arakiris and Yanktons without any practical results, and it was not until several years that the Arakiris, Crows, and Cheyennes formed an alliance and attacked the Yanktons in their stronghold on the heights that overlooked the Missouri, near the mouth of Crow Creek, forced them from their position, and drove them farther down the Missouri. Many were the warlike deeds performed by the Yankton chief in these and other engagements, but none more celebrated than his daring exploit in the Arakiri village, wherein he gained the distinguished appellation of Strike the Ree. A careful examination of the map of that portion of the United States lying west of the Missouri River in those days, which show that the Cheyennes were a race of Indians dwelling between the two forks of the Cheyenne River, in a hilly country known and since receiving wide renown as the Black Hills. Their dominions extended from the headwaters of Heart River in the north to the Platte River in the south. They were warlike and predatory in the extreme, and were designated by their enemies as bloodthirsty and relentless, and by their friends were said to be true specimens of nature's gentlemen. They were the remnant of a once powerful tribe that dwelt on the Big Cheyenne, one of the chief tributaries of the Red River of the North. And during the early days of the present century, their campfires blazed from the heights that overlooked its waters. But meeting with reverses in their wars with the Sioux, they were first driven to the Missouri, where they established themselves in a fortified village, and subsequently dislodged by their old enemies and driven across the river and compelled to take refuge in the Black Hills. The heart of the tribe was now broken, and its members greatly thinned by their long-continued and harassing wars. They no longer attempted to establish themselves in any permanent abode, but became a wandering tribe, subsisting by the chase and following the buffaloes in their migrations. Their principal possessions were horses that they had reared and stolen in their predatory excursions, with which they would visit the Arakiris on the banks of the Missouri, exchange them for other articles of merchandise, and then return to the shades of their pine-clad hills. It was during one of their pilgrimages to the Missouri that old Dakota fell in with them and became enamored with the charms of the young Cheyenne squaw, who during his absence married the pockmarked French Creole, referred to in an earlier chapter, and returned with him and their people to the headwaters of the Cheyenne. In the meantime, old Dakota returned, found out the situation of affairs, and after squandering the proceeds of his labors in dissipation, swearing vengeance on the party who caused his misfortune, he purchased a new outfit, recrossed the Missouri, and in due time was engaged at his old pursuit of trapping. While trapping on the Heart River, he fell in with an American by the name of Williams, an employee of the American Fur Company, who was on his way to the rendezvous on the Cheyenne River after supplies. He was a remarkable man, and had distinguished himself on the frontier by his reckless daring and marvelous exploits. His appearance answered to his character, tall, dark, and muscular, showing strength, activity, and iron firmness, but restless, fearless, and at times of ungovernable temper. This tall, stark Kentucky hunter, in leathern dress, with rifle on his shoulder, and a young Blackfoot squaw trailing after him, leading a pony attached to a travois, was taking a load of furs to the company in exchange for supplies. He informed old Dakota that the company, as he termed it, wished to procure a hunter and guide, who could also act as a Sioux interpreter, and that good wages would be paid for a man that was fitted for that purpose. The young Frenchman, being qualified to fill all these requirements, was easily persuaded to accompany him on his journey, which they accomplished in a few days. While going to the Cheyenne, the Kentuckian related to the Frenchman many particulars concerning his adventures, conquests, and exploits among the Blackfeet Indians, a predatory tribe that inhabited that portion of the country of the upper Missouri from Jefferson's Fort to the Yellowstone, chief of which was a marvelous one that was retold to the writer by old Dakota during the winter of 1865. It was substantially as follows. During the year 1828, a year ever memorable in the traditions of the Blackfeet Nation, a village of these Indians was situated at the junction of a small stream with the Yellowstone. Their lodges, pitched on the banks of the river to the number of over 1,000, were placed where each thought most handy and convenient. For several years, this band had dwelt in that vicinity, buffaloes being abundant, and the hunters were fully employed in laying in their annual supply of meat and robes and food and clothing. The muddy Yellowstone rolled majestically on its course past their village, while great herds of buffalo were grazing visibly afar off, and a long line of mounted warriors rode forth scouring the plain, eager for the fray. In short, they were strong, healthy, and prosperous, and continual sounds of dancing, feasting, and revelry was kept up by these Hyperborean nabobs. The American Fur Company had established a trading post at the junction of the Yellowstone with the Missouri, some distance below this band of Blackfeet, and having engaged in the Indian trade, having gathered around it a train of dependents who had intermarried with the Indians. These individuals were employed in various expeditions in the upper country to trade with the natives, and the profits accrued from the enterprises caused new men to come up from the borders of the frontier settlements and from St. Louis, seeking their fortunes in the upper Missouri country. To be continued. Check back soon for the next part of this incredible story. This story came from the great state of South Dakota, being reported in the Daily Press and Dakotaian of September 10th, 1888. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.